Good morning, everybody. This is a meeting of the CMAQ and TAP-L Project Selection Committee. My name is Doug Ferguson. I am the chair of the committee, and at 11:01, I'm calling this meeting to order. As permitted by the Governor's Disaster Declaration of August 19th, 2022, the determination has been made that an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent for this committee. To ensure a transparent and open meeting as possible, we posted the meeting materials 1 week in advance, and we'll provide a recording of this meeting linked on our website, and we'll take all votes by roll call. With that, John, can you call the roll?
Sure thing. Good morning, everyone. If anyone is sitting in for a regular member, please state your name when I call the member's name. So Jeff Shriver from CDOT. Doug Ferguson from CMAQ.
Here.
Tom Rickert, representing counties.
Here.
Mayor Grasso, representing council mayors.
Here.
Chris Schmidt from IDOT. Darwin Burkhart from IEPA. And Mark Pitstick from RTA. All right.
All right, thank you, John. Moving on to agenda changes and announcements. Staff does not have any agenda changes or announcements. I would add that I do see Chris Schmidt and Mark Pitstick have joined the meeting.
Hello.
Welcome, gentlemen. Does anybody else from the committee have any other announcements they wish to make? All right, hearing none, we'll move on to approval of the minutes. Draft minutes for the June 23rd meeting were provided in meeting materials. Are there any questions or comments or changes for the draft minutes? All right, hearing none, do I have a motion for approval?
Motion to approve, Pitstick.
Thank you, Mark.
Second.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch who seconded that. Oh, that was Mayor Grasso. Thank you, Mayor. Are there any comments or questions on the minutes as moved? All right, hearing none. John, can you call the roll?
Sure. Jeff Shriver from CDOT.
Yes.
Doug Ferguson from CMAQ.
Aye.
Tom Rickert, representing counties.
Aye.
Mayor Grasso, representing council mayors.
Aye.
Chris Schmidt from IDOT.
Aye.
And Mark Pitstick from RTA.
Aye.
All right, the minutes are approved. Moving on to the program monitoring section, programming status sheets. The status sheets for the CMAQ and TAP program were provided in the meeting materials. We're trying a couple of different new ways of showing the projects that are currently in the program. I understand it looks a little bit different from what we've done in the past. If you have any questions on those or suggestions or information that you think should be included, we're trying to use the TIP database to produce the listing of projects. So in many cases, it's going to show projects that are completed over the last year. It also show projects that are currently deferred as future projects where the funding is sitting in MYB. So with that, are there any questions on the programming status sheets?
Doug.
Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm trying to see what the value is of this version of it. Other than the red that says completed, I'm not quite sure. Is it going to give us expenditure stuff? Is this stuff that's obligated or unobligated? I'm just not quite sure what the status of these on the page is.
Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to produce something where we don't have to do double work. Before,
right.
We were literally copying information into a separate spreadsheet to produce the report. So this was a canned report that was coming out of the ETIP database. So yeah, not being able to show the obligations, that's an issue that I'm trying to come up with a solution for. I don't have that at this point in time, but I will continue to work on that.
Okay. And I'm just not quite sure. Is this everything that's in the program or in the active tip? And then what is a future project? I don't know how it's going to be a future project.
So those are projects that where the funding is outside the active years of the tip.
Okay.
In
Okay.
FYE. So those are typically your deferred projects.
Okay. All right.
Hey, Doug.
Yeah.
Just another quick question too. The breakdown of the federal funds. I was trying to determine like which of these are ITAP and which are CMAQ funds. Am I just missing it or?
Oh, in the listing, there's actually two separate lists there. And maybe what I need to do is put a header or something on there so that you can follow which ones are CMAQ and which ones are TAP. They're not commingled; they're separate.
All right, and I do see the two separate lists. I was just it almost looked like all federal funds were included though in the federal allotment.
You're referring to the column that's listed as Fed versus state. Yeah, so those are all the federal funds and all the state funds that are associated with a project. You have to go over into the next columns are only showing the CMAQ funding and the TAP funding.
Okay, I get it. I see it now. Thank you.
Yep, we can provide further clarification. This is my first time using this, so this is helpful. All right, if there are no other comments or questions, I'm going to move on to the obligation goal report. You'll notice that in the obligations, we actually, for federal fiscal year 2022, have hit 113 million in obligations. I'd like to thank CDOT for transferring funds for the State and Lake project because that carried us into basically meeting our obligations for the apportionment that for the federal fiscal year. Now, what we haven't done is eaten into our unobligated balance that in 2021 grew by about $70 million. So we're moving in the right direction. And I would hope to think that 2021 didn't do so well because of COVID and just projects getting held up as communities were making tough decisions on how to get projects moving forward. So with that, are there any questions on the obligation, the program summary and obligation goal report? Yes, Mark.
Yeah, just a quick question. It's really for Jeff. But Jeff, does that mean the State Lake project is ready to go or close to being ready to go?
Yeah, it's very close. It's nearly 100% design, and now, of course, it goes into the black box of procurement.
Right. Right. Okay. Okay. Understood. Thank you.
All right. Moving on to the CMAQ performance plan. As you may all recall, it's been a couple of years, but we are required by the National Performance Management Measures to produce a performance plan for the performance measures associated with the CMAQ program. So just to refresh your memory, the three performance measures that are connected to the CMAQ plan are peak hour excessive delay and percentage of non-SOV travel, and then total emissions reduction. So staff is working on putting together the performance report. I would add that all three performance measures are included in the update to Onto 2050 system performance report. So the actual measures are a part of that approval process. But I did want to go, part of the performance plan is showing how we're progressing on these measures, and then also setting the stage for the next 4 years and the next kind of everything's done in blocks of 4 years with the 2-year midpoint. So for the peak hour excessive delay, you can see the performance over the last 4 years. I mean, it looks like we did really well. Going down is good. Less hours of excessive delay on the national highway system. But in reality, that 10.2 is a direct result of the pandemic and congestion severely dropping during the measurement period. So in all likelihood, CMAQ and the projects we funded have had very little to do with that, meeting the goal and exceeding it. And you'll actually notice for the performance targets for the next 4 years, we're actually showing higher numbers. Because this measure is on the national highway system, the fact of the matter is our forecasting is showing congestion to be growing over that period in time. And there's not a lot that CMAQ projects can do on a regional scale to reduce that number. I do think they have benefit. It's just moving the needle on these specific measures. So before I move on, any questions on the peak hour excessive delay? The first 4-year performance period or the second performance period? All right. Next is non-SOV travel targets. Like peak hour excessive delay, these were also affected severely by the pandemic. For the 2-year progress assessment, we fell short of the 2-year target by a couple of percentage points, actually 0.2 of a percentage point. But then the 4-year assessment showed, because of the work at home numbers, that drastically the percentage increased to 33%, which was over the 31.9% that was the 4-year target. So following that, we do feel that things are going to reduce from that 33%. They're not going to stay at that. So the 2-year target and the 4-year target is keeping in line with the previous trend that we were setting the targets for from the first 4 years. So it'll be growing. We do think that there's going to be some work from home, but that'll stay that way. But as we do feel that we're not going to keep up at the 33%. So with that, any questions on the non-SOV travel targets? All right. Moving on to, I'm sorry, did someone say something?
Sorry. Yeah, sorry, this is Chris. I just wanted to also reference, these are targets that you guys are working with NERC, right, to kind of double check. I just wanted to make that reference that because of the MPO boundaries and all that, just wanted to make sure that folks understood that.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So for the peak hour excessive delay and the non-SOV targets, we're required to set the targets based upon the metropolitan planning metropolitan area. So we need to include outside of our normal planning boundaries, Northwest Indiana, and the sections that are the non-attainment area that are included in there. So as a region, we do slightly better in the peak hour excessive delay in the non-SOV, but when we include that, we have to factor that in as well. And that's just a requirement of the federal performance measures. But for the total emissions reduction targets, it's a little bit different. We're only looking at the projects that we're funding with CMAQ dollars in northeastern Illinois. I would add that the emissions targets are reported on an annual basis to FHWA's public access system. And that's where we show what we've accomplished over the time periods, both the 2-year and 4-year. We are still working on our numbers for the emissions. Things did not come out, and you can see by the highlighted numbers here. We showed a 2-year progress assessment back in 2020 for VOCs of 106 kilograms per day, and the FHWA system spit out numbers that are less for the 4-year assessment. So that doesn't quite make sense. We're trying to assess where there's got to be an error somewhere, but we're just not sure at this point in time. So over the next month, that's what we're working on, trying to figure out why we're coming up with these numbers. And it's quite possible there's been an error in entering into the system, but one of the challenges is in 2020 when we were pulling together the 2-year assessment, we had a couple different folks that are no longer with us, and files weren't stored where they should have been. So trying to recreate what we did in 2020 so that we can compare to what the numbers are coming out of the federal system. I would add that on the nitric oxide standpoint, with our 2-year assessment, we exceeded our 2-year target and the 4-year target at the 2-year assessment, and that's holding true. With the particulate matter 10 or PM10 numbers, our particulate matter for we're required to report on that. However, we're in attainment. We're standardized as a maintenance area for PM10, but the PM10 problem in our region was associated with 2 areas in Cook County that are concerned with mining, specifically the McCook quarry and the quarry that's on the Indiana border. And so we never measured projects for PM10. So we've just been putting our targets at 0 and not reporting anything on those. And at this point in time, FHWA has been okay with that. We'll see if that continues as we move forward. Any questions on the first 4 years? To save space on the slide, I have the targets on the next slide, but before I move from the first 4 years. All right, hearing none. So for the second 4 years, instead of setting the targets based upon previous performance, we set the targets based upon the projects that we have programmed over the next 5 years. So we took all the projects and the emissions that were estimated for those projects over the 5 years, created an annual number, and used that annual number to create a 2-year and 4-year target. So you notice the 4-year target is just doubling the 2-year target. We did produce a PM 2.5 number. However, we're not required as we are in attainment of the particulate matter standard, but we still are measuring it for potential projects, specifically on the diesel side. Any questions about the 2- and 4-year targets? I'll just add that as we get closer, so October 1st is the deadline when we need to turn in our performance plan. Well, in theory, before October 1st, IDOT is required to turn it in their performance plan, which includes both our region and the East St. Louis region to FHWA. Those performance plans will be looked at. I'm sure there's going to be some questions on some of the numbers, but we'll work through that. And before we share the performance plan with IDOT or send it to IDOT, I'll make sure to send it out to this committee so that you all can see it beforehand. Would add that the targets can be adjusted at the 2-year midpoint. And there is no penalty for not meeting the targets. We are asked to explain why we didn't meet targets, but there is no penalty from the standpoint of reduced funding or anything along those lines. Any question on the performance plan before we move on? All right. Next. Oh, sorry, Chris. Did you have something?
I just wanted to say real fast that also the administration has passed a greenhouse gas performance measure, which was in the original package of performance measures, but under the last administration was taken out. So that is another measure that we'll have to, as of right now, have to calculate and come up with a number in October, believe it or not. But they're open for comments right now, I believe, on their proposed rulemaking. And it's probably our estimation, at least, that they're going to push that back a little bit for that greenhouse gas. But we'll be working, and we've already started conversations with CMAQ. It's a little bit different, the boundaries. It's not just non-attainment areas. It's basically, we got Russell on. It's basically any MPO, I believe, in the state is going to have to help make those targets. So there is a very simple formula that is kind of the default, which is sort of X times Y, equals Z kind of a deal. But each MPO is able to kind of come up with a more elaborate way to measure that. And I'm sure Russell is going to have something to say about that.
Yeah, just real quick, the one thing that's different from this than the other performance measures that were already discussed is this is not going to be specific to the CMAQ program. It's more, for whatever reason, tied to the NHS system. So, and CMAP will likely be providing comments. We're in the process of internalizing what our comments are going to be for the notice of proposed rulemaking.
Yeah, thanks for that. So it will not be part of this performance plan that we're discussing today. And staff at Bohai are monitoring the requirements, and the comments, I believe, aren't due before the October 1st. Is that correct, Chris?
Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
Oh, so the state is required by October 1st to set greenhouse gas targets, but the comment on the rulemaking is due like the 15th of October. So
yeah,
it's not quite lining up. And then I believe we have 120 days from when the state sets their targets for the MPO to set targets. Is that correct, Russell?
I believe it's going to be 180 days, but the rule does not specify. It just says basically whatever we've done in the past, that's the process.
Okay.
And stop me if I'm wrong, Russell, but similar to these other PM3 performance measures, which I can't remember where they had it in the PM hierarchy, but this is another one of those that I don't believe we're going to lose any funding due to not meeting the targets that we hit, if I remember correctly.
As is proposed, that's correct. Also, just to add real briefly, it will be a target similar to some of these other ones that Doug discussed, in which what the rule has proposed is it'll be by urbanized area, not MPO. So we would have to work with NERC and potentially Stewart Pack to develop these GHG targets.
All right. Moving on to 5.0 project changes. I'm going to turn it over to John to run through all the changes that were submitted for consideration. John.
All right, so included in your agenda packet are 7 project change requests, which I'll go through individually, and then also included is 1 administratively approved change at the end of this memo. So just getting into it, the first one, we have the Skokie Valley Trail to Gulf Road to Dempster Street. The sponsor is requesting a reinstatement of deferred funds in the amount of $448,000, TAP L, for right-of-way. So the funds for right-of-way are ready to be executed by IDOT and are just waiting on the tip change to move it into federal fiscal year 2022. For this, staff recommends approval of the requested reinstatement of $448,000 deferred TAP L funding for right-of-way. Are there any questions on this change request? All right, so moving on here, the next one we have for Cook County, TUI at Elmhurst and TUI at Union Pacific Railroad grade separation. The sponsor is requesting a reinstatement of deferred funds in the amount of $34,739,000 CMAQ for the construction and construction engineering phases. These improvements are being led by Cook County Department of Transportation and Highways, but are part of the Illinois Tollways Elgin O'Hare Western Access Project. And the department is seeking authorization to advertise this fall and is currently on target to submit pre-final plans to IDOT on August 26th, so last Friday. Staff recommends approval of the requested reinstatement of $34,739,000 deferred CMAQ funding for the construction and construction engineering. Do any committee members have questions on this change? Okay, moving right along. Next we have the Rand Central Mount Prospect Road intersections. The sponsor is requesting an increase of $1,011,282 CMAQ for construction due to a low bid exceeding the estimate. So the program funds have been obligated. The cost overrun is due to the recent increases in the cost of materials and labor, and the right-of-way came in under the programmed amount by $92,640 CMAQ, but due to an authorization, it has not been removed from the project total. And the project ranking remained unchanged at 7th for intersection improvement projects in the 20 to 24 program. Staff recommends approval of the requested cost increase of $1,011,282 CMAQ for construction. Are there any questions on this change? Okay, and getting into the next one. So this next group of 4 are all within the same, within an IDOT project. I'm going to go through them together as they're requesting the same schedule change here. So the 4 are 11th Street, Oak Park Ave to Ridgeland Ave. Second is 11th Street, Oketo Ave to Illinois 7. The third is 127th Street, Wyerton Street to Sacramento Street. And that fourth one is the Dixie Highway I-80 to 167th Street. So all 4 and all these sponsor requests a schedule change for construction from 2025 to 2023. And the sponsor is prepared to move ahead of schedule on all these projects. They're a part of a larger group of signal interconnects. Staff recommends approval of the schedule change for construction funds from 2025 to 2023 for all 4 projects at total $1,049,000. Are there any questions on these 4 set of change requests? Okay, and as I said, we did have one administrative change, and that was the York at Harger intersection improvement project and Salt Creek Trail underpass. The sponsor requested a cost increase of $191,808 CMAQ for construction engineering to cover an engineering supplement that was required for work done through the winter months. And that request was approved administratively by CMAP staff in the amount of $191,808 CMAQ for construction engineering. Are there any questions about any of these that were presented to you today?
Rickert recommends approval of staff recommendations.
Thank you, Tom. Do I have a second?
That IDOT second.
Thank you, Chris. So we have 7 changes here. Is there any discussion that we would like to have on any of these? I know several of the project sponsors are present for the purposes, if there are any questions on these. All right, well, hearing none, the motion is for approval of all 7 project changes. John, can you do a roll call vote, please?
Sure. Jeff Shriver from CDOT.
Aye.
Doug Ferguson from CMAP.
Aye.
Tom Rickert representing the counties.
Aye.
Mayor Grasso representing the Council of Mayors.
Aye.
Chris Schmidt representing IDOT.
Aye.
And Mark Pitstick from RTA.
Aye.
All right, the project changes are approved. Thank you very much.
Can I make one statement here real quick? Chad Riddle here, IDOT
Yeah.
Local Road. If Mount Prospect is on, I just want them to take note since the funding has been approved. Can they get us concurrence as soon as possible so the project does not fall off the contractor's refusal list or whatever? So we're going for a late award here and they need to get concurrence as soon as possible to us.
Okay, I will reach out to them through the Northwest PL to make sure that gets done.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, moving on to 6.0, the program development for the next cycle. We discussed at the last meeting some ideas regarding preliminary engineering. And after the discussion that this committee had, and also the STP Project Selection Committee, staff, in particular CAMA, has put together some different suggestions for how we may handle preliminary engineering requirements as part of the next call. So I'm going to turn it over to CAMA to talk us through some of those.
All right, great. Thank you, Doug. As Doug mentioned, at your last meeting in June, we did propose some modest additions to the application booklet to continue to clarify what's meant by substantially complete with regard to the requirement for preliminary engineering to be complete in order to apply for funding. During that discussion, as well as the STP Project Selection Committee discussion that day, concerns were raised about the expense of completing preliminary engineering and that not all project sponsors are willing to risk these expenses when no funding has been identified to complete a project. There's also recognition that there's a time limit to the validity of environmental and cultural clearances, and having to update these clearances can add additional time and cost to projects. And finally, that the CMAP requirement for completion of preliminary engineering does put a review burden on IDOT, as well as other regulatory agencies for projects that really may not end up to be viable over time. So in response, staff did prepare 4 options that were described in detail in the packet memo. And these options were also discussed by the STP Project Selection Committee earlier this morning. So if you were on that meeting this morning, this is going to sound like deja vu. So the first option, recognizing that completion of preliminary engineering does lead to better cost estimates for projects, both because the environmental impacts have been identified and also because alternatives may have been eliminated during that phase 1. So this option proposes tying future cost increase eligibility to the degree of completeness of preliminary engineering. The more complete the preliminary engineering, the more future phases that are eligible for increases, and the higher the limit on those increases would be. Of course, increases are subject to overall funding availability. But this option does allow sponsors that are confident in their cost estimates to delay completion of preliminary engineering and take on the risk of encountering increases in the future. The next option, we know that the length of time needed to complete the preliminary engineering phase is often unpredictable due to the number of review agencies or departments involved, as well as just seasonal limitations for environmental service. On top of that, at least on the highway side, federally funded phase 2 design engineering can't begin until preliminary engineering is completed. And really even the funding agreement reviews for that second phase of engineering, which typically take 9 to 12 months, can't begin until phase 1 engineering is complete. So this option kind of recognizes this unpredictability and proposes that the earliest year that project phases could be programmed during the project cycle would be determined based on the degree of completion of the preliminary engineering. For example, for projects that had completed preliminary engineering, design engineering would be able to be programmed as early as year 1 of the new program, and construction as early as year 2. As the degree of completion decreases, that would push out that earliest programming year. Earliest programming years to overall funding availability. Staff also proposes with this option that the status of the preliminary engineering be reassessed during the next call for project cycle, and that any project that has not reached complete or nearly complete threshold be removed from the program and not considered for funding again until the next call for project cycle. So next, another concern noted in June was that those environmental clearances that are obtained during preliminary engineering may expire before a project reaches construction readiness, and that this can lead to a need to redo prior work and can cause delays while waiting on additional reviews. This option would allow sponsors to not fully complete preliminary engineering, but would limit the funding eligibility for future phases based on the degree of completion. So the more complete preliminary engineering is, the more phases of the project that would be eligible for funding. Next slide. Lastly, just like no build is an option for our projects, no changes, it's also an option for us today. So really that's a quick overview. If Doug will go to the next slide, of the options that were presented in the memo. The summary on the screen now shows all 4 options together and also includes the pros and cons of each that were included in the memo. So I think leave this up on the screen and go ahead and invite initial reaction from the committee.
Thanks, Kama. So these are just some ideas that were floating out there. We would like to get your feedback as we put together a proposal for the call for projects. As Kama mentioned, we want to keep the CMAQ and TAP requirement the same as STP. So whatever we decide upon, we kind of need to get agreement from both this committee and the STP project selection committee. So with that, comments, questions?
We can maybe start with just sharing some comments that CDOT made on the earlier call, the STP call, that we thought that options 1 and 3 were, potentially workable and potential improvements. We were less keen on option number 2, thinking that they may be kind of overly restrictive, given that certain projects that may have more streamlined environmental review, could potentially use funding sooner than the last year of the cycle, and I don't know, that one didn't seem to be as appealing to us as 1 and 3.
Thanks. Is there anybody else? I mean, we realize that there is no perfect solution here. It's really trying to balance, like making sure that we're doing our due diligence as far as programming funds that like we think are going to move in a timely fashion, versus also we realize that there's constraints that our sponsors have. So, Tom, I saw you unmuted. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, probably more of a question. I just got back from vacation late last night, and so I really haven't been able to dive into this. Is this in lieu of then what we were exploring back in June?
It would be. So essentially, instead of requiring being substantially complete, the definition that we discussed in June, and instead, phase one would be judged on the degree of completion. So is it underway, nearly complete, substantially complete? I don't have the list in front of me. There are 5 things though, and it is complete. So based on that degree of completion would then, in the case of option 1, limit cost increases, option 2, what years you could be programmed in, option 3, what phases would be eligible. So as long as phase 1 engineering was underway in some way, a project would be eligible to apply.
All right, so as long as it's underway in some way, I guess I'm a little bit concerned though. I'm just trying to figure out, there's, how do I say this? There's a lot of phase 1 submittals and are probably be submitted that historically have not been. Is that a concern? I mean, I read the pros and cons, and it sounds like that there's the thought that there would be more applications, which that has a lot of concerns, and then without the substantially complete, I don't know. It just seems like there's going to be a lot of unknowns and a lot of program adjustments in the future. So I'm just trying to understand what brought about the desire to move away from the completion of the preliminary engineering thoughts from June to this now.
Honestly, it was the conversation had in June. Concerns that reaching substantial completion of phase 1 was not practical. So these are some options if both committees don't want to stick with the substantially complete definition and open it up to project applications where phase 1 is not quite complete. These are some ways we could do that.
All right, and then it sounded like Jeff was sharing some of the discussion from this morning. So it generally was a thought that came out of the STP that 1 and 3 was the more desired.
Yeah. So the committee this morning favored option 1 and 3, thinking that these options, while they do, add some financial risk for later phases onto the sponsors, these 2 options would also give sponsors more control over their own project implementation decisions. So they can control what phases are eligible for funding or what the level of cost increase that they're eligible for is, and decide whether to take the financial risk up front by completing phase 1 engineering, or to hold that financial risk to later in the implementation process. The committee felt that those 2 options were pretty similar in nature and didn't favor one over the other, and really was kind of interested in hearing what this committee had to say. So as Doug noted, it's important for a consistent policy across the 3 funding programs, in particular because we put the call for projects out as a single call. We don't want to have folks trying to figure out which status applies to which project. So the idea being today that what we heard this morning, what we're hearing now, the staff will take both of those into consideration and come back with a final recommendation as part of draft application booklets that later in the fall. So November, I think, our next scheduled meeting.
All right, so we're looking at November then for approval of the direction so that you can, okay.
And Tom, I mean, without a doubt, there is the possibility that it opens the application process to more potential applicants. However, we do get a handful every year that like apply, even though they haven't even started phase one engineering. And I mean, so it still happens. Now, staff typically sets those aside, so we don't have to evaluate those. But what we're also hoping for is it reduces some of the burden on local road staff that get inundated with requests for people trying to submit preliminary engineering reports to IDOT for review in advance of the call. So, I mean, maybe it'll reduce some of that and people rushing, which may not generate good results either.
Well, all of this, I'm glad that they're looking at, because there's been, I think it's addressing some of the concerns. And if this helps on the burden on IDOT, I think that's a positive aspect. Did IDOT comment this morning on this proposal?
Yes, we did.
Do you want to share, Chad?
Yeah, you want to share, Chad?
Again, I rambled on a little. I just basically, in summary, it's, you know, it's all said and good that, you know, we can have this done, but we do end up getting a lot of last minute submittals saying, no, you need to sign off on this to say that we've substantially completed whatever it is. And that becomes a burden for our staff, you know, just to meet these deadlines. We do try to set our priorities, and when you're getting these things at the last minute for projects that may or may not be funded, where we're trying to get reports and reviews done for projects that are coming up on letting deadlines and everything else, it becomes a potential issue. So we do the best we can, and we will abide by whatever rules you place, but it just still comes down to you know, timing and everything else. And the thing is, over the past, you know, when the rules, once the rules get established and people are aware, so if we do establish this now, then people can say, oh, I'm not ready this year, but when I go for the next call, I can casually do my phase one, so it's ready to go, you know, next year, the year after, whenever it's there. So it's just this last minute when the call comes out and a consultant or a staff member at the local agency says, oh, here's an idea for a project. How can we get this, you know, through the system in 3 weeks and get IDOT to sign off on it? That we feel we get a lot of pressure on us.
Yeah, that's, I completely understand that. I guess Chad, if you're still there, one other question in regards to the Pell. Is this a position that IDOT has as far as including the Pell as underway?
Where Pels are new to us, I know they're basically replacing feasibility studies, and the fact that Pels have some meat to them that will lead into a phase one. So to me, that is not potentially meeting it, because doing the Pell will not lead to design approval. That'll lead to your project being, you know, feasible or not, or practicable or not, and then you still need to do your phase one. So whether or not, you know, you stand with that or not, but it's not going to, it should shorten it, because some of the data you collect in that, and some of the clearances that might come through that, if you are so inclined to ask for them, do transfer over, which they would not do for a feasibility study. So that's still a gray area and sort of new for us. So it all depends on the involvement of the project, you know. And the whole thing is, if someone's proposing a sidewalk project and an existing right of way without any major things, you know, that's something that can be signed off on in a pretty quick period of time. But if someone's doing a major intersection rebuild, you know, you're talking, you know, the 6 to 12 to 18 months for environmental clearances, depending on what right of ways out there, what endangered species and all that kind of stuff that may be impacted based on review periods for ESR studies. So it's all case by case.
Okay, well, good comments. I think under the new definitions, at least Pell could be considered as underway. So I was a little concerned about the June recommendation, because I just felt like with the Pell, you weren't really, like you said, Chad, we weren't close to design approval, and so we still had quite a ways to go with phase one. But at least it feeds into the phase one. It is, in a sense, part of the phase one. So it makes sense, I think, under these new definitions. I think that's it for now. I don't have any recommendations personally. What I'm going to do is take this back to the counties and get some thoughts back to you as soon as possible.
That'd be great. Mark?
Yeah, I don't have any recommendations either, but just a couple comments. It seems like option 4 is, keeping this, it's basically what we talked about in June, is keeping the substantially complete requirement. So that's not new, but the other options, I like the way you laid them out there, and I think that it's clear, but potentially they could be combined, right? They're not mutually exclusive. You could combine some elements. It would, take some tracking then of those things, but I'm not opposed to combinations of that. RTA doesn't often submit applications. Service boards certainly do, and communities do through the Access to Transit program. So I think these the types of sort of options you laid out make sense, as far as giving some opportunity for projects that aren't substantially complete to have a shot at something, but then with some restrictions and requiring them to move along in order to stay alive. All that was option 2, right? Is staying alive. Do they all have a sort of a revisit? Like if you at the next call for projects, was there only one of the options that had that revisit?
It was really only option 2 that had the revisit, and that was just because where we were programming it. If you're programmed out in year 3, we come to a call for project cycle before we get to that year. So with the other options, there's a little bit less schedule control, making it hard. I mean, we can always revisit. We could, don't hurt me here, Doug. We could revisit every application every cycle for any criteria, but
well, and we're usually pretty lenient in reprogram years because we're usually way under the obligation threshold. So
for sure on the CMAQ side. On the STP side, it is complete opposite.
Okay.
So that's part of it here too. Yeah, I would also add, like with CMAQ, I mean, if you look at the obligation goal report, you'll notice that, I mean, we've been fairly liberal with, and I don't want to call it over programming because of the use of advanced construction. We kind of have to be to keep projects in the pipeline, because the actual obligation doesn't occur until that AC is converted. So oftentimes 8 to 12 months before an AC conversion happens on a project, we have to keep a pipeline of projects in that AC process. But we've been fairly, I don't want to loose with like giving increases, especially over the last year with inflationary costs affecting project costs. We've been approving quite a few substantial cost increases to keep projects going forward. And then we've been bringing in deferred projects that have gotten going, such as, and I'm not picking on Cook County here, but such as the Cook County project, that the TUI projects that we just brought in off the deferred list. So most of the funding that's going to be available for CMAQ is going to be in the later years when we do the programming. That doesn't mean that projects don't have the potential to move forward, but TAP has a little bit different scenario. The IIJA almost doubled the amount of TAP funding that we get. So there's funds in the first few years of the TAP program that can be available for programming. So there are two different types of programs at the current time. And I mean, yeah, I'll be honest, when we were discussing, Cam and I were discussing option 2, I'm like, well, most of my CMAQ projects are going to be programmed in the 5th year anyway, so or 4th year anyway. So it's it doesn't really help with CMAQ. But yeah, I'll leave it at that. I will add that if you have any additional comments, please get those to us. And we do want to hear from everyone before we put together a staff suggestion or recommendation. Mark, you just raised your hand.
Yeah, just one final comment is that, you know, options 2 and 3, the restrictions that come with that are kind of restrictions that take place up front, and that's a decision made up front, whereas option 1 is putting a restriction on for later requests for cost increases, which I'm in favor of that. But yeah, are we really going to be able to say that then? You know, okay, your project comes in and, oh no, we're substantially complete, but that means you can't get any cost increases, you know, or you can only get 25%. Are we going to hold to that? Will we be able to do that?
Well, yeah, it's the burden on staff to track all of this, because I mean, you have all the existing projects that were programmed under prior agreements, and then you would have new ones in, and tracking projects as they come in and what their status was when they applied, and keeping track of that over time. Whereas, I mean, maybe CAMA doesn't have the same number of projects or projects that are like, I guess, like as complex, if you will, like from the standpoint of they may not be moving up. She has very clear defined deadlines that people have to, that the SDP shared fund projects have to meet that aren't on the CMAQ and TAP program. So it'll be interesting. I mean, either way, but I agree.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Final thoughts, Kim?
Yeah, I was gonna say, it sounds like the two committees are thinking along the same lines. And so I think that staff will likely come back with option 1 or option 3, maybe slightly modified, thinking about adding that additional checkpoint that was proposed in option 2, if that makes sense for 1 or 3. Yeah, I think there's definitely not polar opposite opinions here among the two committees. So I think staff has enough direction to come back with something that should be palatable to both committees for the fall.
All right. Moving on to other business. Is there any other business that members wish to bring before the committee today? Yes, Mayor. You're on mute, by the way.
Yep, just not fast enough yet. I'm learning about a bill that State Senator Curran sponsored, SB 1900, which is going to create a public-private partnership regarding transportation and infrastructure bills in the state of Illinois. It's something that I'll track, and I'll give you some information by the next meeting. But he tells me that it has legs, and it's likely to get passed in the spring session. But it looks like it'll make it looks like it will promote contractors and others to come forward with projects, and then they can still bid on them even though it's their ideas. Apparently there's a prohibition against that, and so it kind of stifles projects. I'm not quite sure what it all means, but seems to be in our wheelhouse, and so when I find out more about it, I'll let the committee know.
That'd be great. Thank you. And I'll definitely share whatever you find out with some of our legislative staff here. And we've also, as part of our accelerator project, been looking into this, and there might be a connection there as well. Any other business? All right, hearing none. This is a public comment period. Is there anybody from the audience? We did not receive any comments in advance of today's meeting, but if anybody in the audience wishes to address the committee, now's the time to do so. Feel free to unmute yourself and identify yourself to the committee. All right, well, I'm not hearing anything. I'll move on to item 9.0, the next meeting. As Kemma mentioned, our next meeting will be on November 3rd. And hopefully the changes such as the engineering requirement, that we'll have a proposal for you guys to vote on or consider and vote on. So with that, seeing as there's no other business, I'll call for adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Rickard, second.
Thank you, Tom. We can just handle this as a voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. At 12:02, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank
Have
you.
a great day,
Thank
everyone.
you.
All right. Stay safe.